Thank you very much. A wide range of perspectives from a wide range of backgrounds and sets of experience. I am sure there are lots of questions on a range of the issues that have been discussed, and I'm sure there are many of you burning to know what Elham's third point was. So I throw it open to the floor. If you have a question, please comment, but please keep your remarks and please indicate which panelists you would like a response from. Thank you. Gentleman, second row from the back. There's a microphone, so please, above you.
I'll look at that then, shall I? I'm Paul Bell from the Bell Pottinger Group. Professor, I had the privilege of working quite closely in South Africa with the constitutional authorities and was Director of Communication Electoral Commission in 1994, which is a terrific experience. But one thing, of course, that you learn from processes like this, and I'm sure you'll agree that constitution making is as important as the product itself, and it's a messy, practical business. And I was thinking about some of the key differences between our experience in South Africa and the experience that the Libyan people will now have to manage. One of them key, and we've referred to this in different ways, is time. The South African constitutional process was one that extended over several years, and in fact, I was in the hall on the night that Mandela and de Klerk signed at 3:30 in the morning. You know, you have those experiences and you live these things for the rest of your life. You signed an interim constitution. And that was a very successful document, I hope you'll agree, and got us a long way forward. And one wonders whether, for example, there might not be some consideration going forward, whether the first round here shouldn't actually be an interim one. Give yourself the time, for heaven's sake. And in that context, of course, everybody has made the point, 2 months is just really problematic. I think, secondly, there were many more interlocutors within the process in South Africa than perhaps I, certainly from the outside, not being an expert on Libya by any, from what one can see, one sees a dearth of civil society. There has not been a long time for people to discuss democracy, whereas in South Africa, we started back in 1956 with the Freedom Charter. And if you think about the Freedom Charter, those of you who know anything about South African history, it was a very simple one-page document that set out, much as the interim sort of constitutional guidelines that have been set out by the Transitional Council have done. But that was a process that I think perhaps one could take a lesson from, because the document that was signed in Kliptown in 1956 drew on submissions that came from right across the country. They were actively sought by the African National Congress, even though it was then a not quite yet outlawed organization. But the organization on the ground that drove the product that arrived at the Kliptown Congress in 56, with thousands and thousands of representations from ordinary people and from civil organizations who were given that very important sense of participation. And when you come forward to the 1990s, we'd already had a civil society movement that had been discussing these things at some length. And I would suggest too that beyond the issue of time and interim constitutions and so on, perhaps you should be considering whether it is possible to have a more formal sense of popular participation in making submissions to the constitutional process.
Thank you. Can I invite which of the panelists would like to respond?
The question was, I was identified in that question, if not asked the question. I accept the identification. I think that was an excellent solution, the idea of having an interim constitution. There were certain fundamental principles in that constitution which had to be accepted in the final constitution, and it was left to the Constitutional Court to certify that the final constitution did comply with those fundamental issues in the Constitution, which was a very deft and interesting measure. So you could go quite quickly towards the first step, obtaining fundamental questions, and then take a bit more time, a couple of years, where South Africa had much more advice internationally and so on, and much more advice from within, made sure that it fitted and got rid of all the kinks in that constitution and came up with the final constitution. I think that's a really interesting device in this case.
Thank you very much. If everyone could turn their phones off. I think the gentleman second row was next.
Thank you very much to the Progress Initiative. So this is an excellent opportunity to discuss something that's really important to all of us. Much Sir Geoffrey for an interesting presentation. There is a little but though. Interesting for me because it sets out a lot of the material that was in our constitution. I have a copy here. The 1951 constitution is not out of date. It was made for us, by us, approved. We practiced it. The fact that we lost it to Gaddafi wasn't the constitutional fault. It was the fault of the people who were in charge at that time. I have in my hand as well an announcement by my colleagues in 1981, the Libyan Constitutional Union, who drew attention to these two institutions, the Libyan institution, raise the flag, adopt the constitution, fight the Gaddafi from that form. That's still valid now because the case for adopting the constitution was made by yourself and by the panelists. When you were giving the speech, and I enjoyed it very much, I was taking a lot of notes down, but you were actually describing the core content of our constitution. But sadly, for some reason, you didn't mention that. I think that's, in a way, misleading a little bit, obviously not intentional. It misleads because it's almost saying that we have nothing to go back to. Gaddafi succeeded in convincing us that he started us. Our time started with him. That's not true. The gentleman there, I'm sure, as mature as myself, perhaps a little low, he practiced law in Libya under this constitution. We didn't have any problems with it. In fact, it was made for us. We didn't get our independence until we made the constitution. And it was approved by the United Nations. The view now, because there are a lot of concerns that were expressed, incidentally, I thank Dr. Majid for mentioning this fact. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that. The concerns are all answered here. We don't have to practice it as it was. You yourself said it should have an ownership. It does. It should identify with the concerns, with the culture, with the makeup of society. It does. You mentioned South African example several times. South Africa came out of an apartheid system, the ugliest governing system we have known in our lifetime. Libya hasn't come out. We came out of a nightmare of Gaddafi, but we did have something before him. The view that was expressed in this organization I'm referring to said, this is what we should adopt and move from within that, because it allows it. When we read the Constitution, I read it in 1981 and several times since, what you volunteered in an elegant manner, if I may say, it contains that. The core of it in there. Of course, it spoke about the monarchy and all that kind of stuff, but we don't have to do that. That's repealable. In fact, there are huge sections in here which were repealed. And it is possible, there are provisions for that, but we can modernize it. Therefore, the lecture, perhaps the title should have been, how can we modernize the Libyan constitution and move from there? Thank you very much.
Just very, very briefly, if I may. We have that constitution in a larger bundle. We looked at it. We saw it was a monarchy. So we thought perhaps it wasn't all appropriate. There's no reason at all why parts of that constitution cannot be adopted today. It seems to me that it's quite... I didn't think I did. It seems to me completely blank, but it could well be. Let's chuck it away. Will you somebody remind me?
I think we need to do that again, I'm afraid.
Okay, we'll do it again.
Start the answer again.
We did certainly look at that constitution, and we saw it as a monarchy, of course, which would may be appropriate, maybe doesn't seem to be at the moment. There are other aspects which have a feel of a 1951 constitution. A number of countries have been recently involved in constitutional renewal. A lot of the countries that were given independence by the former colonial powers, some of which I've mentioned in the Caribbean and Kenya and so on and so on, they've taken the opportunity now to draw what they can from that history, but mostly things have moved on very fast in a number of different areas, particularly in the area of human rights, in the area of accountability that has been mentioned. There's no harm, certainly, in looking at that constitution, in taking what fits today from that constitution, but I would advise this country, if we were to write a written constitution, and I have advised a number of other countries moving to a 21st century constitution, that there are really interesting models from which we can learn from other places. You don't have to adopt them, they should be looked at, and I'd be surprised how much of them would fit in the 21st century that simply didn't fit in 1951.
I concur with Sir Geoffrey. Afghanistan is another very good example of a country that has looked very much to the constitution under its constitutional monarchy for inspiration, but has yet looked at more recent developments in things like socioeconomic rights and environmental rights, which simply were not creations of legal constitutions in the 1960s. So I would agree there's absolutely no reason not to look back for inspiration, but there are certainly developments since then which the new Libya may wish to take advantage of. I think very briefly before we move on to the next question, Mr. Helgamati also wanted to respond briefly.
Yes, I'd just like to respond to that point. While I'm stressing again that the 1951 Constitution was absolutely great and so advanced, and within that time, with hindsight at that time, compared to the environment and how was the Arab world and what was going on in the region, and it has entrenched basic rights which were not available in many other countries. I have to tell you few points which I think are rational points why we need a new constitution, and if you allow me to do so. First of all, number one, there is a whole section in the 1951 Constitution which states that the political system is a monarchy system, and it's not constitutional monarchy, it's absolute monarchy. While the king was a great man, one of the key founders of modern Libya and respected and admired by every Libyan, in that constitution itself, either Article 194 or 196 states that the section which specifies the monarchy as the system can never be changed. That means you either take that constitution as a whole or you leave it as a whole. That's number one. Okay, I stand corrected on that. Okay, all right. Okay, can I just carry on? Number two, that constitution, although this was the best possible way of drafting it, was actually drafted by a committee of 60, which were not directly elected, and the constitution was never put to a referendum. In 2011, we need a constitution to have much more political legitimacy by being drafted by a directly elected council from the people, because that is the strongest political legitimacy that you can have, and also a constitution must be put to a referendum so that the people either approve it or reject it, and that gives the constitution much more strength. Thirdly, while yes, the most parts in that constitution which entrenches and guarantees basic rights and human rights are there, but 60 years the world has moved on. The culture of human rights has moved on. Democracy itself has developed, even in Western countries. Even in this country, democracy over the last 60 years has evolved and improved a lot. So today we go back to that constitution as it is, is really not doing the Libyan people in the 2011 year of 2011 any service. However, we can use it as one of the many sources, just like in 1951, that committee of 60 looked at so many other constitutions and drafts from Arab and Muslim countries. Today, we can use the 1951 constitution and other constitutions as sources to refer to, but I think we can come up with a much more up-to-date, advanced, comprehensive constitution that has got much stronger political legitimacy than the one we did in 1951.
Thank you very much.